in. Welcome back to our evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're heading into the Shire for a cozy dive into Hobbit lore. The Shire might seem peaceful, with just green hills and warm hearths. But Hobbit history is full of surprises and quiet bravery. We'll uncover where these small folk came from, discover their curious traditions, and share tales of Bilbo and Frodo. They found themselves in adventures much bigger than imagined. From unexpected battles to long, bitter winters, danger knocked. The Shire's past proves unassuming lives hide remarkable stories. These are glimpses into the rich history that shaped the Shire. I think they'll bring warmth and wonder for tonight. If you enjoy these tales and want to support, consider Patreon. It helps keep my Hobbit hole running and stocked. Grab your coziest blanket, pour something warm. Settle in for a journey through Hobbit folklore, where quiet lives often leave the biggest marks. In Middle-earth's lore, hobbits, or halflings, first emerged. Their actual origin is somewhat of a mystery. Their story is half forgotten by men and overlooked. Hobbits were humble, reclusive, and happy to live unnoticed. Early history isn't definitively explained in Tolkien's writings, but it seems they're a subgroup of men who became distinct. By the time they were discovered, hobbits had already been around for generations. It's believed hobbits first appeared in eastern Middle-earth. The earliest groups lived by the Anduin River, near the Misty Mountains and Mirkwood Forest. They hadn't yet developed Shire customs or culture. They were a migratory people always on the move. This was due to other peoples and environmental changes. From these early hobbits, three distinct kinds emerged. These were the Harfoots, the Stoors, and the Fallohides. Though they shared common hobbit traits, each group had its own tendencies and physical differences. These were shaped by the lands they wandered. Harfoots, the most numerous, were sturdier. They had browner skin and nimble feet, suited for hillsides. They were the first to travel across Eriador. In olden times, they were friendly with the dwarves. Since they lived near the Misty Mountains for a long time, the Shire folk would most descend from the Harfoots. Now, the Stoors were broader and heavier in build, often living near rivers and water sources. They most resembled men and could grow facial hair. They had a slightly more adventurous nature, and were unique for their swimming ability. Despite most hobbits' fear of rivers, the most infamous Stoor was Smeagol, later known as Gollum. And finally, the Fallohides were taller and fairer. They were the most adventurous of the bunch. These were the least common hobbits, and had a better relationship with the elves. Fallohides loved trees and forests. They were skilled with language and song, and preferred hunting over farming. They were also more inclined to leadership roles. Fallohides often became leaders of hobbit groups. As the Third Age passed, Sauron's shadow stirred. The hobbits found themselves on the move. They were driven westward, fleeing wars and malice. In those early days, they lived by foraging and hunting, traveling from place to place with no true home. By around 1050 of the Third Age, hobbits settled in Eriador. Each group took a different path westward. Some crossed the Misty Mountains going south. Others ended up north of Rivendell. The Stoors settled in Swanfleet, a marshy region. They later fled back towards the Misty Mountains, when Angmar's power terrorized the kingdom of Arnor. Around 1601 of the Third Age, two brothers led hobbits west, across the Brandywine River to a fertile land. This would eventually become the Shire. The Shire was granted by the King of Arthedain, under an agreement to acknowledge his rule, and keep the land free from outsiders. In return, hobbits governed themselves with little oversight, but the kingdom of Arnor had long since waned. Its strength fractured after the war with Angmar. Corruption plagued its lands and peoples. So from the beginning, hobbits lived in autonomy. This freedom let them craft their own way of life, untouched by Middle-earth struggles. Nurturing a unique culture, safe from the world. This settlement marks a significant turning point. They began developing an agrarian lifestyle, growing crops, building homes, and expanding culture. By the time we meet them in stories, the Shire enjoyed peace and quiet, but trouble did knock at its borders. In 2747 of the Third Age, orcs invaded the Shire, led by a chieftain named Galfinbull. This was unusual and alarming for the hobbits. A hobbit named Bondabraz rose to the occasion. In the Battle of Greenfields, Bondabraz led the charge. He famously knocked Galfinbull's head clean off, sending it flying into a rabbit hole, inventing golf. Or so the story goes. The victory was a proud moment for the Shire, a rare taste of heroism in their quiet lives. Years later, in 2912, a harsh winter brought trouble, a time of hardship and worry. So many hobbits sadly didn't make it through that tough, cold period. But like always, the Shire pulled through. These tough times, though not common, served as a reminder to the hobbits that even their quiet home wasn't completely safe from the troubling forces lurking beyond its borders. So, the Shire was originally split into 4 regions. We had the North, South, East, and West Farthings. You could think of them kind of like different neighborhoods within the Shire. Each had its own little towns and farms, but the Shire as a whole felt remarkably united for hobbits. Later on, in the Fourth Age, a couple more areas were actually added to the main Shire. The East Farthing, situated near the Brandywine River, was the part most connected to the outside world. Meanwhile, the West Farthing was where Hobbiton was, along with the more spread-out rural areas of the Shire. Honestly, the Shire, in its humble way, wasn't really a target for the major players in Middle-earth. Its small size, lack of importance strategically, and ordinary resources meant it wasn't a tempting prize for the ambitions of the Dark Powers. Even the hobbits themselves, so simple and unassuming, weren't really on the radar of the powerful kingdoms nearby. But what truly protected the Shire wasn't just its being overlooked, but the hidden help from the Dúnedain Rangers. These vigilant protectors kept watch over its edges, making sure no harm came to the peaceful people inside. Over time, though, the hobbits, so used to peace, started forgetting about these protectors, and most hobbits today don't even know they existed. Hobbits were a people deeply connected to the land, so their homes, called hobbit holes or smiles, were literally dug into the hills and mounds of the Shire. These cozy underground dwellings felt as natural as the trees and rivers, designed purely for comfort and an easy life. But as the years went by, some hobbits, especially those who had a bit more money or a thirst for adventure, started building homes above ground. Even then, the core of hobbit architecture really stayed the same. Round doors and windows inviting warmth, hearths at the center of every home, and a strong connection to nature. To a hobbit, a home wasn't just shelter. It was a reflection of their whole lifestyle, built on comfort and tranquility, with the natural world always within easy reach. Their early way of life developed slowly until it eventually became the defining characteristic of what it means to be a hobbit, at least in many people's minds. When the Shire was first established, farming became the absolute core of their lives. Hobbits were experts with the land, growing crops, brewing excellent alesh, and tending to their gardens with a passion that seemed almost natural. Vast fields of wheat and barley covered the Shire, and vibrant flower gardens bloomed everywhere you looked. But of everything they cultivated, perhaps the most renowned was pipeweed, a simple plant that hobbits dried and smoked. What started as a casual habit among them soon became popular worldwide. The Rangers of the North picked up the habit, and even Gandalf grew quite fond of it, often seen puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. Besides pipeweed, the hobbits also gained fame for their brewing, particularly in the South Farthing, where the best soil yielded the finest alesh. A hobbit could proudly boast about the ale from their local tavern, confident that nothing in the entire world could truly compare. But despite their talents in farming and brewing, What truly made hobbits stand out was their strong sense of community. They were people who cherished family, friendship, and especially hospitality. They always looked for chances to get together, whether for grand feasts, lively festivals, or just a good old party. Hobbits took great pride in hosting celebrations like no one else, with endless food and drink, and laughter filling the rolling hills. And in true Hobbit style, their birthdays were occasions for giving gifts, not receiving them. On their special day, the birthday Hobbit was the one handing out presents. In essence, Hobbit culture wasn't about epic deeds or heroic journeys. It was about the simple pleasures: a well-kept garden, a good smoke, and the warmth of loved ones gathered around a table. It was a life lived close to the earth, yet with open hearts to the world. And then along came Bilbo Baggins. For ages, the hobbits of the Shire had lived peacefully, completely untouched by the major events unfolding across Middle-earth. But that all changed. In the year 2941 of the Third Age, when a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, a rather well-off and decidedly unadventurous resident of Hobbiton, found himself thrust into an adventure unlike anything the Shire had ever witnessed. It all kicked off when the wizard Gandalf, accompanied by a group of dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield, arrived at Bilbo's distinctive round green door. They were embarking on a perilous quest, aiming to take back the lonely mountain from the formidable dragon Smaug. And, to Bilbo's utter astonishment, they wanted him to be their burglar. Now, Bilbo was definitely not the type to go seeking adventures. In fact, he was perfectly content with his books, his garden, and his cozy little hobbit hole. But Gandalf had a different vision, and soon, despite all his objections, Bilbo was swept away on a journey that would lead him far beyond the safety of the Shire. Encounters with trolls, goblins, dragons, and even mysterious elves became part of his incredible story. But no encounter left a greater mark on him than the strange, unsettling creature known as Gollum. Deep beneath the misty mountains, in a secluded and forgotten place, Bilbo stumbled upon a small, shimmering golden ring. A ring that appeared quite harmless at first glance, but would soon reveal its true, immense power. This, as we know, was the One Ring. However, at that moment, Bilbo had no idea of its profound significance. To him, it was simply a fortunate discovery. But this ring, originally crafted by the Dark Lord Sauron, was fated to transform not only Bilbo's life, but the destiny of all of Middle-earth. He returned to the Shire about a year later as a hobbit who was both richer and more experienced in the ways of the world. This was largely due to playing a key role in defeating the fearsome Smaug and helping to restore the dwarven kingdom of Erebor. But, as you might expect, his newfound reputation as an adventurer caused quite a stir among the more traditional hobbits of Hobbiton. They viewed his travels and his wealth with a mixture of awe and distrust. Despite this, perhaps as a testament to how fiercely hobbits protected their peaceful existence, Bilbo's tale didn't really alter the Shire's general sense of isolation. Hobbits carried on living just as they always had, mostly uninterested in what was happening in the wider world. Yet, Bilbo had inadvertently brought back a piece of Middle-earth's dark history in the form of the ring. The ring gave its wearer the power of invisibility, which Bilbo used occasionally to escape difficult situations. But it also carried a much more sinister influence, gradually increasing its hold over him. For many decades, Bilbo lived a long life that seemed quite untroubled. However, the ring subtly extended his lifespan and began to impact his mind. Now, hobbits, being naturally resistant to the ring's seductive power, managed to keep Bilbo mostly free from its darker effects for many years. Nevertheless, its influence was always there, and as Bilbo grew older, he became more possessive and secretive about it. As Bilbo grew older, he started to guard it more closely, becoming quite secretive. Bilbo's grand adventures were certainly over, but the world beyond the peaceful Shire grew increasingly perilous. By 2951, Sauron had fully returned to Mordor. The Dark Lord then began actively searching for the One Ring. He had no idea a hobbit possessed it. He sent out his agents, the dreaded Nazgul, also known as ringwraiths. And yes, I do have a whole video on them if you'd like to look it up. While the Shire remained safe for a time, the hobbits' peaceful days were clearly nearing their end. Around this time, Gandalf started suspecting Bilbo's ring was more significant than it seemed. He grew deeply suspicious when Bilbo's behavior became quite unusual. This prompted Gandalf to investigate the history of the One Ring. Many years later, Bilbo hosted an enormous birthday party for his 111th birthday. His plan was to leave the Shire and give the ring to his younger cousin and heir, Frodo Baggins. However, Frodo had second thoughts and considered keeping it. The ring's influence over him had become too powerful, but with Gandalf's firm encouragement and guidance, Bilbo reluctantly parted with it and departed the Shire. Even Gandalf himself was too afraid of its temptation, so the ring went to Frodo. Frodo, much like Bilbo before him, was unaware of the ring's true nature. But a few years later, Gandalf confirmed that Frodo's ring was indeed the Master Ring. He revealed this critical truth to the young hobbit. Gandalf issued a dire warning. Dark riders were hunting, and the ring needed to be taken far, far from the Shire. So began a very long and incredibly difficult journey. It led Frodo and his companions from the Fellowship through dangerous, orc-filled mines, ancient elven woods, murky swamps teeming with remains, and a giant spider's den. Just to mention a few of the challenging places they traversed. They finally succeeded in destroying the ring within the fires of Mount Doom. With the ring gone, Gandalf and the Eagles swiftly rescued Frodo and Sam. They were carried away from Mount Doom's fiery destruction. The war was over and Middle-earth was saved. But for the hobbits, the war's end didn't mean their own journeys were complete. When Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin finally returned to the Shire, they expected to find their home just as they'd left it, peaceful and untouched. Instead, they discovered it had been ravaged by the wizard Saruman. He had seized control during Gandalf's absence. The once charming and idyllic Shire had been transformed into a grim, industrialized wasteland. Its beauty was choked by smog and filth, with many hobbits forced into labor. Saruman couldn't strike directly at Gandalf, so he sought to harm the hobbits Gandalf cared for so deeply. But the four hobbits, now hardened by their wartime experiences, wouldn't accept this. Led by Frodo and the others, the hobbits rose up against Saruman's forces. This conflict became known as the Scouring of the Shire. Though this battle was small compared to the major War of the Ring struggles, it held immense significance for the hobbits. They fought not for empires or the world's destiny, but for their own homes and way of life. And so, the Shire was reclaimed, and peace was re-established. The land began to heal, and in time, so did the hobbits' hearts. But not Frodo's. Even as the Shire returned to its old ways, Frodo couldn't find his peace. The deep scars from his journey remained. The physical wounds from Shelob's sting and the Morgul blade, along with the mental burden of the ring, left him permanently changed, unable to find comfort in his former life. In the year 3021 of the Third Age, Frodo received a special gift, passage to the Undying Lands. This was a place where elves and Middle-earth's greatest heroes resided in tranquility. He departed the Shire, alongside Bilbo, Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, sailing west from the Grey Havens. He understood this meant leaving behind the Shire and his friends, whom he had fought so hard to protect. But Frodo accepted it, leaving the Shire forever in pursuit of ultimate peace, beyond all pain and sorrow. With the defeat of Sauron and Saruman, and the conclusion of the War of the Ring, the hobbits of the Shire returned to their tranquil existence. Yet something had irrevocably shifted. These once ordinary folk had transformed into legendary figures. This was thanks to the remarkable deeds of Sam, Merry, and Pippin. These hobbits, who never initially sought adventure, had somehow become central to the most significant struggle of the Third Age. Under the guidance of Samwise Gamgee, who had grown immensely in wisdom and stature, the hobbits of the Shire began the task of restoring what Saruman's cruel, brief rule had destroyed. During his travels, Galadriel had bestowed a gift upon Sam, just as she had for every member of the Fellowship. He received a small, plain wooden box, adorned with a single silver rune on its lid. Inside lay earth from Galadriel's orchard, appearing like soft, fine gray dust. Nestled within the earth was a seed, resembling a small nut with a silver shell. With Galadriel's gift of magical earth, Sam began planting saplings everywhere that beautiful trees had been felled. He also placed a speck of the precious dust at the base of each new tree. He planted the seed to create a new party tree, which remarkably grew into a magnificent Malorn tree. It's said that when this tree bloomed the following summer, the entire Shire became golden with its flowers. And so, this hobbit, who started as a simple gardener, became one of the Shire's most esteemed individuals. He married Rosie Cotton, raised a large family of 16 children, and was elected mayor 7 times. Under his gentle leadership, the Shire truly flourished. His friendship with Frodo remained one of the most profound bonds in his life. Even after Frodo's departure to the Undying Lands, Sam carried the memory of their shared journey. But before Frodo left, he attended his best friend's wedding celebration. Sam and Rosie then moved in with Frodo at Bag End, which Frodo generously gifted to Sam. Eventually, Sam himself joined Frodo in the Undying Lands. This was because he, too, had briefly carried the ring. Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, known to us as Merry and Pippin, had also played incredibly crucial roles in the War of the Ring. They returned to the Shire as genuine heroes in their own right. Their time spent alongside the riders of Rohan and the soldiers of Gondor had profoundly transformed them. They were no longer simply mischievous young troublemakers. They had evolved into warriors and leaders, earning respect both within the Shire and beyond its borders. Merry became the master of Buckland. Pippin eventually inherited the esteemed title of Thane of the Shire, one of the highest positions within Hobbit society. Together, they ensured the Shire's safety and prosperity for years after the war. Their leadership helped solidify stronger connections between the Shire and the great kingdoms of Gondor and Rohan. There, they forged enduring friendships. Though the Hobbits of the Shire remained a relatively reclusive people, they now possessed a quiet yet significant link to the wider world. The effects of their time with Treebeard the Ent were also quite evident. After drinking the magical Ent draughts, Merry and Pippin had grown noticeably taller than other hobbits. This served as a fitting, physical reminder of their vital role in Middle-earth's grand history. While their time there was serene, it wasn't long before they reached the close of their significant lives. Merry eventually passed on later, and both he and Pippin were laid to rest in Gondor, a final, honorable resting place among the esteemed. When King Elessar, who was Aragorn, their dear friend, passed, the 2 hobbits were interred alongside him, fitting companions to the king they'd served and fought with. And speaking of Aragorn, with the start of the Fourth Age and his ascent to the throne, he made sure the hobbits would never be forgotten. Under his rule, the Shire was officially declared a sovereign land, meaning no outside power could ever claim it. In deep gratitude for the hobbits' vital role in the War of the Ring, Aragorn also enacted a special law. No outsiders were permitted to enter the Shire without explicit consent. This simple measure ensured the hobbits could live in tranquility, untouched by the outside world's conflicts. As the rest of Middle-earth progressed, the hobbits quietly returned to their familiar way of life, enjoying delicious food, good companionship, and the comforting warmth of home. They had witnessed epic battles and the downfall of dark forces, yet their spirits still cherished the simple joys of daily existence. The hobbits never actively sought fame or power, but their involvement in the War of the Ring demonstrates that genuine heroism doesn't always need to be loud. Frodo carried an immense burden. Sam faithfully stood by him, no matter how dire the circumstances became, and Merry and Pippin stepped up as leaders precisely when their people needed them most. Even the Shire itself, with its quiet steadfastness, held firm against all that attempted to break it. In the end, the hobbits showed the world that even the very smallest among us can truly make a profound difference.